Okay, let's talk about the conclusion paragraph. At this point, you should feel pretty good because the majority of your work for your essay is done, and now you're ready to just wrap things up. Okay, so there are three main components in a conclusion paragraph. First of all, you need to make sure that you mention your thesis again at the beginning of your conclusion paragraph. Make sure that you remind the readers what your position is, and this is essential. You have to reword it completely. Do not just parrot the thesis statement from your introduction. That's never impressive. Okay, so once you have restated your thesis statement in different words, and it sounds completely different than your introduction, but it's the same main idea, then you want to go ahead and recap the main points that you made in the essay. It's pretty impressive if you can synthesize your ideas and bring us to a final understanding about your topic or your position. And you want to make sure that you are reviewing the main points that you made in the same order as you mentioned them, and that would be part of your organization of the essay. And then you want to end with a clincher. The clincher is like your last chance to leave an impression on your audience and make an impact on them. You have to think about your clincher just as hard as, if not harder than, the hook for your introduction paragraph. It has to be memorable, and ideally, you want it to be haunting, not in such a way as a horror movie would be haunting, but haunting as in, like, you want the reader to keep thinking about your essay and what you said at the end of it for a while after they are done reading. And if you can achieve that, then you have an amazing clincher. So what are some strategies that you should avoid with your conclusion? These are no-nos. So first of all, beginning with an unnecessary overused phrase such as in conclusion, in summary, or in closing. Those are not impressive. They can come across all right in speeches because you're talking out loud to other people, but they seem very mechanical in writing. Introducing a new idea or subtopic in your conclusion. A lot of people are like, oh, I have this really cool fact that I couldn't fit in my body paragraph, so I'll just put that in my conclusion. That's not a good idea. It's very confusing to introduce new points in your conclusion. Avoid ending with a rephrased thesis statement that is identical or similar to that of the one in the introduction. Also, make sure that you're not making sentimental, emotional appeals that are out of character with the rest of the research paper. It is totally okay to incorporate an element of pathos and make an appeal for the audience's emotions, but you want to do so in a way that fits with the rest of your paper. And you want to also avoid including evidence like quotations and statistics that should have been included in the body of the paper. So what are some strategies that you can use to make your clincher memorable? So I'm just going to give you a few, and you can decide which one you want to try. And if none of these work for you, then you can go back to the drawing board, do some Googling, and find something that sounds good. So first of all, you can pose a thoughtful question. So for example, for an essay about abortion, undoubtedly, abortion should be illegal in Illinois. It not only executes babies who may already be fully developed, but it also may cause physical, emotional, and financial injury to the mother. Children have so much to live for. Why should abortion be an option when there is a lifetime of opportunity ahead? So that question is kind of inspiring, and it encourages the audience to lean towards sympathizing with this unborn child. Okay, technique 2, you can look to the future. For example, being the backbone of the educational system, educators need to be paid like the professionals they are. Without well-qualified teachers, schools are little more than buildings and equipment. If higher paying careers continue to attract the best and brightest students, there will not only be a shortage of teachers, but the educators available may not have the best qualifications. Ultimately, America's youth will suffer, and when youth suffers, everyone's future is at stake. Okay, so that's kind of dramatic, not overly dramatic, but it does make a point that if something is not done about teacher salaries, then the education of basically the entire future of America is questionable. Okay, third, you could challenge the reader, but remember, don't talk right to them and don't tell them to do something because that's awkward. So you have to do it indirectly like this. Though serving on a jury is not only a civic responsibility but also an interesting experience, many people still view jury duty as a chore that interrupts their jobs and the routine of their daily lives. However, juries are a part of America's attempt to be a free and just society. Thus, jury duty challenges us to be interested and responsible citizens. So the indirect message here is that if we want to be interested and responsible citizens, we should do our civic duty and fill in for jury duty. But nowhere did it say everyone needs to or everyone must serve on a jury, otherwise they are horrible citizens for America. Or you must serve on a jury. Consider your responsibility to this country, because that would be more aggressive and less effective. Okay, fourth, we talked about framing when we did the hook. Now remember, if you chose the idea of framing, or even if you didn't, but now doing your conclusion you feel inspired to use framing because you have a good idea, you can still go back to your introduction and change this. So remember, framing is where you start the essay by referring to something and then you refer back to it at the end. So you're starting and ending the same way, in which case you're framing it. So this is the same example as we talked about for the introduction hooks. If you start with mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, and then you lead into an essay about obesity, you might end with something like mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the healthiest of them all. So you're alluding back to that original hook, and this is super effective. A lot of teachers actually prefer that you use framing because they feel that it makes it complete. I'm not going to require that you do this, but if you can do this, then you are showing that you can really write at a higher level. Okay, fifth, you can use fancy words correctly to make a dramatic impact. And this is misleading. It's not like you just want to put in a bunch of big words. But the more precise and impressionable your word choice is, the more memorable your clincher will be. So I tried to bold some words here that makes this a more impressive clincher. Nonetheless, it is undeniable that Shakespeare's role in the development of the American vernacular solidifies his critical role in our history. Without the presence of his brilliantly written literary works, the English language would not be as cultivated as it is today. So all of those words in there, the bolded words, they really make for a strong impact on the reader at the end of the essay. And by the way, I forgot to mention, some of these, including this example, are inspired by previous student essays. Okay, and sixth, you can create a sense of balance by using parallel structure. So, for example, and this can be something that you write, or it could be something involved in a quote that has parallel structure. So one would be, as Alexander Pope, an 18th century English poet, once enlightened, to err is human, to forgive divine. Again, anytime you're doing quotes, you need to make sure that you have a signal phrase and you say who the person is, and then make sure you add that source to your Works Cited page. Another example is, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. inspired the world when he asserted, "We are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." So that parallelism is very powerful, and just make sure, again, it's more impressive if you can use quotes from people that everyone recognizes as a famous name, rather than like, oh, my neighbor Joe Schmo just told me this, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to be as memorable. And don't shy away from writing your own examples. These just happen to be examples from other famous people. Okay, so those are 6 options, but there are so many options. So many of the hook techniques that we talked about, you know, like using alliteration and repetition and imagery and puns and other figurative language, using a short story or referring back to that anecdote from the first paragraph, or referring back to questions that you posed in the first paragraph. All that stuff can be very effective. So if none of the 6 that we mentioned works for you in your topic and you just don't feel inspired yet, then do some further research and find something that does. Just remember that everything you find on Google is not really credible. So just because they tell you that it's okay to end with a boring question that is uninspiring doesn't mean you should actually try that. So if you're going to go do your own research, just use your head, okay? But hopefully you are adequately inspired to go forth and write amazing conclusions.